Hello and welcome everyone to the COMSYS 10-minute video series. Today I'm talking with Ruslan Klymentiev about his model, the effect of homophily on co-offending outcomes. Before we get started, Ruslan, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am Ruslan. I do my PhD at the Faculty of Law and Criminology at the Ghent University in Belgium. And my focus is on co-offending networks. So basically how people end up in the networks of criminals to commit crimes together. And then I use simulation methods to try to find mechanism how those networks evolve and how they progress in time.
Okay, great. Well, let's talk a little bit about the details of your model. Do you want to show us a little
Yes,
presentation?
sure. All right. So yeah, the main question behind motivation of making this model was to answer the question, how does similarity-based partner selection affects co-offending outcomes? And to clarify, co-offending is an act of crime commitment between two or more people, and co-offending outcomes in our case was specifically structure of the networks between criminals, and then how does the information diffuse within those networks. And as the background, we believe as criminal scientists that that offenders, they usually want to find partners who are equally trustful and useful. So on the one hand side, offenders want to be with someone who's trustful, who will never betray them, who has low chances of failure or betrayal. And on the other hand side, we think that offenders also want someone who is more useful for them in terms of providing more skills or like expanding their own like criminal repertoire and level up their criminal game. And regardless of their motivation, why people find partners and how they find partners, we can still see that homophily is present. So homophily is the preference for similar partners or similar connections. And in terms of criminal connections, we see that homophily present in terms of age, sex, ethnicity, marital status, spatial and social proximity, and even violence level. And I will discuss the model as we built it. As the question suggests, the flow of the whole process was that we wanted to see how the homophily affects the network structure and then how the diffusion information happens. And we have modeled information diffusion through skill sharing, because for us it was important, because in co-offending we believe that skill exchange is one of the main factors why people collaborate together, because they actually learn and they teach each other. And we had several hypotheses for this model. I will not focus in details on them, so they're also in the publication that we have published earlier this year. I will just maybe discuss the first two in brief. So the main assumption was that if homophily in the network in the environment goes up, then stability of partners of connections is increasing, but at the same time, the rate of skill exchange is going down. So that like based on the previous studies and based on the prior knowledge, that was like the reasonable assumption to make. So we should also see it in the criminal network literature or in this simulation model. And coming to the model algorithm, so model is pretty simple, which could be seen as both like pros and cons, because on the one side, we try to make it simple, not to put too many factors or too many variables to isolate the factor of homophily. But at the same time, we can also argue that, yes, indeed, this model doesn't capture all the small details or small mechanism of co-offending actions, but we tried our best to actually isolate the effects of homophily on those two factors, which are structure and the diffusion of information. So we start with n agents and offenders, and then each agent has parameter v or attribute v, which corresponds to arbitrary value which could represent, let's say, combined information on the age, sex, ethnicity, and some other factors. So that's just like a number taken at random from 0 to 1. And then each agent has also a skill from the beginning that they know. So they have one skill out of m possible skills. And then at each time step, each agent makes a decision who they want to connect or collaborate with. So each agent makes a decision out of n-1 offenders. And then if the decision is mutual, so if I selects J and J selects I, then we say co-offense happen. And then we build a connection in the network between those two agents. So that's how social network was being formed through crimes. So in this case, if it was the first collaboration, first mutual selection, we built a tie in the network of weight 1. If this connection is repeated, so if they already did crimes before in the environment, we just increase the weight of this tie by 1. And then after this, the skill exchange takes place. And it's better to show with the example. It's also pretty random and straightforward process. So if agent I with skills A and B commit crimes with agent J who has skills C and D, we combine the skill sets of both of them together. So now we have A, B, C, D together. And then we select a skill at random out of this like combined skill set, and then whoever doesn't have this skill will learn, will add the skill to the skill set. In other words, we can say that agent J dot agent I skill C, and then the process repeats. So then again, the next time step, again, agents make decision. It's completely new. So the previous actions did not affect the new actions or new decisions. And the process repeats for like thousands or how many iterations you run. And then after some time, we stop the simulation and collect the data on the networks and also the skills of the agents. I will not go too much into the math. There's also not so much math involved, but I will just say that in our case, we had two main scenarios. We had a completely random partner selection, and we had a homophilic environment or like high preference for similar partners. And we had parameter beta that was controlling this flow of preferences. When beta was 0, it was random partner selection process. When beta was 50, it meant that the preference was high. And 50, it's again an arbitrary number. And then this beta controlled the probability of partner selection in this equation. And I think also people give it different names. Here I use the word softmax function. So that function assigns probability for each potential partner on each time step. And then, yeah, so for the higher beta, the higher probability will go to the potential partner who is similar to the partner who makes decision. And yeah, so this parameter, this value D is the similarity of those two values that I showed before, parameter attribute D. And in our case, we were looking at several measures to assess the structure of the network. We have collected density, transitivity, average degree, and average tie weight to measure what is the structure and dynamics of the network. And to measure the diffusion of information, we have looked at an average number of skills per agent after the whole simulation run. And just to summarize the results, I will not go to show the plots. I will just summarize them what we found, and that we also see like a trade-off of behavior of agents of offenders in our case. So on the one hand side, when offenders are exclusive with their partner selection process, so when they only want to collaborate with someone who is similar to them, they develop stable partnerships, which can also be called as strong ties in the literature. But at the same time, this also limits their access to novel information, so they become less skillful. On the other hand side, when offenders become more inclusive, so when they when they don't care that much who to collaborate with, they can learn more skills from each other, so the skill rate goes up. But at the same time, this comes with the consequences of having less stable connections, which can be also seen as weak ties in the network. And then also, like we saw that offenders who are exposed to partners from different subgroups, they become more skillful. So it's not just the number of partners that you have, but also who are those partners, like which subgroups do they come from? If they come from diverse subgroups, you have more chances to acquire more skills than if you would only do crimes with someone who is within your own subgroup. And I will come back quickly to the model just to say that indeed the model is simple, which also is good in one way, because like in my case, I use the word co-offending, crime, criminal partner. But also, if you just remove the word co-offending, you can apply this model to any other social process which is similar to co-offending. For example, you can think of those agents as business partners or as researchers who try to collaborate with someone else. So basically, this model can be applied to different processes, not just criminology, which also suggests, or it also was our motivation to show that indeed the criminal network formation is not that different from the formation of network between scientists or companies or organizations.
Yeah, I think the comparison to researchers is very apt, especially at my university. There's a always been a large emphasis on getting people who from different departments to work together, interdisciplinary, and I could definitely see that, the success in research is connected to those, the idea of the skills in this model.
Yeah, definitely. And also maybe like if you also look at the results that we discussed in the paper, results by themselves are not so like unique for the like world of social science. But in my case, in our case, like we wanted to summarize the results and then frame them in the co-finding literature just to show like, hey, listen, this is not different from what we see in other network formation studies, that the same applies also with the like criminal networks.
I'm not a criminologist, so this might not be a smart question, but uh, do you think that essentially people getting caught or not caught would affect things a lot in the model? Like I can envision a scenario where, all of a sudden that, somebody who's caught might have nobody wants to connect to them in the future once they're um, released. And then also people who are not caught sort of might have stronger ties in a sense, but it might have an interesting dynamic with the higher your skill level, the less likely you are to get caught, sort of too. I don't know.
That's a good point. So in our model, we haven't included this. And of course, yeah, it's a simplification.
Sure, yeah.
And I just know that some studies, they show that offenders who are popular, so who have many connections and many crimes, so they eventually become less popular, if that makes sense. So people don't actually want to connect with someone who is prolific because then they're a riskier partners for
Interesting.
them. Because then then the chances of getting caught are higher, because if someone is committing more crimes, they become more visible for law enforcement agencies. And then if you commit crimes with them, then you also put yourself in the risk of getting caught.
So I'm sort of interested in some of the challenges you face, but I'm wondering if one of the challenges might be finding data sets to compare to. If I don't know if you have any plans to do that, but I know I imagine that getting detailed network of criminal networks or detailed data of criminal networks would be really difficult.
That's a valid point. So yeah, we had challenge first of all, because all of this is an assumption how we think the criminal world behaves, right? So we have no proper idea like whether this is the case, like even all those assumptions about the trustful and skillful partners, it's just an assumption that we think, okay, that's how offenders must choose their partners. And all of this also we assume that's how they do everything. And then of course, like there are some surveys of offenders and they would ask them, hey, like, what was your motivation and so on. But again, it's mostly on a small sample size. And again, we can also argue how those surveys are representative. And then, yeah, also as you discussed, the problem is how to validate this model with the real data. And we discussed it briefly in a paper. Like I didn't want to make a strong comparison of some assumptions that, hey, we see similar patterns or like this model replicates the real world. But what we saw that if we run the model with the high homophily, the networks become clustered. Maybe actually now I can switch to the simulation. So if we look at the real life data, we see that criminal networks are sparse. So we see that there are many connections that are missing, and actually we see like subclusters, subgroups and clusters in the networks of real vendors in real life. And then in our model, we see also if we make homophily high, like high enough, we also see that the resulting networks on this graph in the middle, that the graph eventually becomes also sparse. And then there also some subgroups emerge and some clusters emerge in the network. So that kind of replicates the real life networks of criminals. And then also like, we could argue or like assume or like make a theory or suggestion that perhaps also homophily is high in real life of criminals, because like the high homophily scenario replicates the real life. But we did not want to make this assumption in the paper because yeah, there's not enough evidence actually to claim this, but there are still some suggestions for the future work to maybe add more mechanism and see how the network evolves and how it resembles the real life network. For example, if I make homophily preference low or like random choice, we will see that the network become eventually fully connected, so everyone knows everyone. Then in the long run, everyone, yeah, people become connected to everyone else in the environment.
Very
And in
interesting.
our case, we only had parameter beta, which controlled the preference for similarity. Could also, yeah, change the number of agents and number of skills just for the robustness check. But for us, what matters the most is how beta affects the whole flow. And in my case, I did not put too many graphs in the visual model because, yeah, also I'm not sure how people are familiar with Mesa and Python, but like you can basically run models through the visual representation as I do right now, just to maybe do like some checks and then, yeah, see how the model evolves in real life. But also you can run it in a batch run, like with like 1,000 iterations or how many iterations you choose. And then there I would put all my results. But in this case, the only results we see in the model is the number of offenses or like number of connections that happen over time. But yeah, if people want to use this model, they could also add more graphs if they want to see like how the results change in real life. But in my case, it wasn't relevant. But then if you run the simulation through like Python, then you would see all of the results that we have, and also you can add your own results in the model that you want to see.
Yeah, in addition to the topic, I also wanted to point people to your model on COMSYS because it is unique in that it is Mesa and it has some good documentation for people who are learning Mesa or want to run a Mesa model very quickly but aren't as familiar as they might be with NetLogo. So, are there any? You said you're a PhD student, or is this part of your dissertation? What are your next steps going forward?
So ideally, I would like to make this model more complex. I would like to add maybe more hidden, uh, more networks of formation, sorry, more mechanisms of network formation to see maybe what something is missing and then whether the initial conditions affect the flow of the whole environment, or whether like the crime types make it different, how people find each other. So I would want to upgrade this model to make it, more realistic if I can achieve this. And indeed, this model, like this application and this model, the next model, is part of my dissertation on co-finding networks and co-finding patterns.
Very interesting. Well, thanks for taking the time to show us this model. Yeah, in addition to, learning Mesa, I think people find the topic really interesting as well. So,
And also, I think also what I wanted to show in this paper that criminal networks are not that different from other types of networks. And that what makes this research also more interesting, that we can see lots of similarities and we can borrow the techniques and methods from other studies, from other categories, and just apply them in our case. And the same people can also use method from criminology to study their own research.
well, thanks again for talking with me. I'll put a link to the paper that you mentioned as well, so that people can find that, and there will be a link to the model on COMSIS.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for talking with me.